Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you. I am humbled by each and every one of you. Some of the most incredible people I have ever met are parents of special needs kids just like you. And so I feel really lucky to be here to share in this conference with you. So my job, you heard, was to share some information about resources that might be helpful to you that could come through the Epilepsy Foundation, to tell you a little bit about the Rare Epilepsy Network, which is a collection of many different rare epilepsies coming together to try to learn from each other, try to build critical mass in terms of how many people we can study and learn from, and then encourage researchers to use that information to make new discoveries. And then if we have time, the last piece I want to tell you about is a thing that we're trying to build and evolve the Rare Epilepsy Network to become a much bigger part of, and that's called a learning healthcare system. We'll talk more about that when we get to that point, but I'm really excited about the opportunity to bring parents and caregivers and patients together as equal partners with the healthcare providers and the researchers to really focus on the priorities that matter and to do the studies that are going to get us to the next level. So those are my three topic areas today, and I sort of built in a break in between each one of them so we can stop and talk, and I really encourage you to ask questions along the way. That's totally fine, and we can take as long or as little on different sections as you like, so let me know what you're most interested in. So I'll start with some of the resources that the Epilepsy Foundation might have to offer to you. First, I'll share with you that the mission of the foundation is pretty broad. It's to overcome challenges of living with epilepsy for people of all types of epilepsy. So this is a big population. This is the 3.4 million Americans in the country who live with epilepsy every day. And to accelerate therapies that will stop seizures, find cures, and save lives. And so we do a mission that is both providing services to people and their families, promoting awareness, increasing the level of education, both in the healthcare provider community, but also in the lay public, so that people, in the grocery store know what epilepsy is and have heard of a seizure. Those kinds of things. But at the same time, we're also trying to do research and push forward research that will help change the outcome for people. And so we have a very broad mission. In the past, some folks have felt as though we focus too much on one end of the spectrum in epilepsy, right? Those folks who can live well with epilepsy. And that's been a problem. The breadth of our community is pretty breathtaking. And so I think we're trying to do a good job of understanding what are the needs of all the different kinds of people and families who live with epilepsy, and what is most important for us to be able to help and share and build tools that are most useful to people in all of those different places on the spectrum. So first I wanted to ask, have any of you to this point interacted with the foundation or used any of the tools or resources that they offer? Right. So a few folks. So that website is really, I think, one of the very first places that could be a helpful resource to you. It's epilepsy.com. And it is a treasure trove of information about all sorts of different issues and types of epilepsy and resources that might be helpful to you. But another that I really wanted to emphasize is our helpline. So we have a 24/7 phone or online helpline. So if you have a question in the middle of the night, this is a place you can call to try to get direction for some answers. In some cases, they'll be able to answer your question right away, and in other cases, they'll take down the information that you need and then seek it out and get back to you with the answer or the resources. These are folks who are trained in epilepsy. We have epilepsy nurses on staff. We have Spanish-speaking individuals who help with the helpline. And the other thing is that they are set up with a list of resources that are both nationwide and local. So if you let them know what your local area is, they can help connect you to people and resources in your community who might be able to provide services directly to you. So this is a place I would really encourage you to keep in mind and check out. So it's a really broad range of services that they can help on. Advocacy and legal services, so discrimination, legal action, cases of ADA and other kinds of disability rights, locating things like camps or better care management. We also have clinical trials that I'll mention a little bit later, but financial assistance for travel to specialty care, travel to clinical trials, support groups, information about insurance. So it's a pretty broad range of services, and I would encourage you to start here if you need some help. So we talked about some of these. They can also connect you with a local Epilepsy Foundation organization. So I work for the National Epilepsy Foundation. We also have local affiliates all across the country, affiliates and chapter organizations that provide direct services to people in their communities. So we also provide support for individuals who've been affected by sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, or SUDEP. We have a bereavement support person on our staff and is available to anyone who needs those kinds of services. So the next point I wanted to make is that we can also help you find the right level of care. I think there are many people with epilepsy in this country who are treated by family doctors, by pediatricians, by general neurologists, and that's terrific. We want to make sure that those providers have the most up-to-date information about best treatments for epilepsy that they can provide. But there are times when a next level of specialty care is really what's needed. And so there's an organization called the National Association of Epilepsy Centers, or NAEC, and they accredit epilepsy specialty care centers. And what that means is this is a center that has got advanced training in epilepsy, so they have epileptologists, epilepsy nurses. They also provide multidisciplinary care, so they very often will have a neuropsychologist on staff, social workers on staff who are familiar with epilepsy and the kinds of issues that people often deal with. They have access to genetic testing, can provide things like dietary therapy or device therapy, things that often a general neurologist might not feel comfortable with or wouldn't have access to prescribe. And so there are times when being seen at a level 3 or level 4 epilepsy center can really make a difference in someone's care. And so I'd encourage you, there's a really neat website called My Seizures No More that walks through a series of questions. And depending on how you answer those questions, they may say, yes, you would potentially benefit from being seen at an epilepsy center. And so if you're interested, this is a place you can go and kind of understand, am I in a position where being seen at the highest level of epilepsy care would be beneficial? So the foundation also provides a lot of different educational programs designed to help get people who interact with your child or with you, if you're the person who has epilepsy, comfortable with, understanding what epilepsy is, knowing what to do if a seizure happens, so seizure first aid, and these curricula are online, so if your child is going to school and your school nurse has not been trained in epilepsy care, this is a place you can refer them. Other school personnel, we have trainings for other people working in the school system, child care personnel, daycare workers, first responders, both EMS and police. We've got trainings to help those folks understand what epilepsy is, what it isn't, and the right reactions to deal with in an emergency situation. We also offer training for those who do care coordination for epilepsy. And so We also have training for medical interpreters, so people who are in a medical setting trying to do interpretation. This is a training to help them learn more and understand epilepsy and its treatments. And then we also offer training grants for individuals, healthcare, so folks who want to develop a research career in epilepsy is another place where we provide training. So this is all available on the website. There's also a lot of general educational information for anyone to come and access on that website. So this could be another set of resources for you to help educate your community about epilepsy and what it means for your family. So my job at the foundation is to lead the research team, and so I had to put in here a little overview of the different programs that we sponsor in the research department. We do 4 different areas of programs, and the first one I'll say a little bit about is our innovation programs. And the goal here is to try to fund the kinds of research projects that may be high risk, so they might fail, but on the other hand, they are new ideas about how we could treat better, diagnose better, create better outcomes for people. And so we have a new institute called the Epilepsy Innovation Institute. And the goal of this institute is to fund projects that are in the end going to have an impact on people's lives. So we start by surveying the whole community, and we say, what are the biggest challenges that you deal with in living with epilepsy? And when we did this survey the first time, we got over 1,000 people responding, somebody from every single state. We got people in every different place on that spectrum that I talked about, right? People who are seizure-free, they take their medications, and epilepsy really, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't affect their lives all that much, all the way to people who are, caregivers caring for people who have been catastrophically impacted by epilepsy, people who have daily seizures and people who had yearly seizures. And the really interesting thing to us was that across all that spectrum, the biggest issue that came out was the unpredictability of the seizures and how much that impacts every single day. And you might think, yeah, that makes sense for folks who deal with daily seizures, right? You don't know when it's going to hit, you know it's coming every day. It actually is also an issue for people who have yearly seizures, because they live every day wondering, is today the day that I'm going to have? So we took that information in and we said, what can we do to help people deal with this unpredictability? And the challenge that the Institute issued is to create something that we're calling My Seizure Gauge. It's a way, it's proposed to be a way that we can predict the likelihood of a seizure on a day-to-day basis. And the way we're doing this is by funding a research team who's going to enroll people with epilepsy who have been implanted with EEG in some way. So, there's devices that now have been implanted in the brain. There's also something called sub-scalp EEG. So it's just under the scalp, but it's implanted. You walk around, you can monitor your EEG all the time using this implanted system. And then we're going to ask those folks to also wear a whole bunch of peripheral devices that measure changes in the body. And we're going to put all that data together and analyze it to try to understand, are there patterns in what we see in this data that can help us predict this person is at high likelihood of having a seizure or this person is at low likelihood of having a seizure. And you can imagine that even without being 100% accurate all the time, having that level of information available would really help people plan their lives, feel like you have a little bit more control over what today's outcome is going to look like. So that's a goal that we've been pushing through the Innovation Institute. And we got applications in, we peer reviewed those applications, and we're in the process of deciding which of the teams will be the winning team. So I'm excited about that, and we'll be sure to push out that information when we get it. But we also support new therapy grants. And much like what you all are trying to do, we're also trying to help give a little bit of funding to teams that are very close to the finish line. So, that funding to help them commercialize or get to commercialization a product that they've been developing. And I'll show you a couple examples that we've funded. And then the next set of programs I'll talk a lot more about when I talk about the Rare Epilepsy Network, so I may skip over those for now. Tell you about our Next Generation Scientist program. This is a group of awards that we do in partnership with the American Epilepsy Society. So just like Isa was talking about partnering with AES, we already do that with them on these early career awards. And we've found this to be a really excellent partnership with AES. I would encourage you to keep going along this line. They do the peer review, they handle all the solicitation of applications, but you have a voice in selecting which ones get your funding. And this way, you're bringing together the power of the American Epilepsy Society and reaching out to all of its members and really making your dollars go further by not having to invest in your own peer review or your own system to bring in applications and things like that. So I love the way you're thinking along those lines. And then last, I'll say a little bit more about this later, but we also offer digital tools that we hope are going to help to make research easier. And so if we provide them to the community, individual researchers don't have to build them themselves over and over and over again. So I'll say more about that in the end. Okay, so these are just a couple examples of products that have gotten new therapy funding from us and have really made it either to the marketplace or very, very close. And so we think we have a pretty good track record of identifying therapies that will be able to cross the finish line. And just a couple that I'll mention are the Epidiolex, which was just recently approved, CBD, and our funding helped to support the first clinical trial that they did in people with epilepsy. So we're really pleased to see that has had a fairly good effect for many of the people who try it. Not everyone, it's not a magic bullet, but it does have efficacy for some people. And like we were talking a little bit at lunch, there are some other valuable potentially aspects of that drug in terms of behavior, attention, and other things. So we're real proud that that's been one in our stable of grants. The last one I wanted to mention here, adalurin, is an interesting compound. It's a small molecule, so it's a drug, but it actually acts to modify the transcriptional machinery. And so this drug is being tested in conditions that have a point mutation that cause a stop in the protein translation. And the idea is that if this drug can help read over that premature stop codon, then at least some small level of the protein can be read through and may improve outcomes. So this was originally developed for muscular dystrophy, and we're now trying it in CDKL5 and in Dravet syndrome. So people who have those syndromes because of the point mutations in the stop codons can be eligible for this study. So it's a long shot, to be sure. It's very high risk, but we feel confident that by investing in new kinds of therapeutic approaches, we're gonna be able to help move the needle forward. Okay, so the digital tools that I mentioned, some of these may be useful tools for you. So how many of you on a regular basis track your child's seizures? Most everybody, yeah. So do you do that on paper? Do you use an app for that? So I see paper, Google Calendar, yep. No, those are all of them are great. This is an electronic seizure diary that is available in an app form that the foundation has created, and we're constantly trying to improve it and optimize it. But it's a way to input your child's medications. You can get medication reminders, you can track seizures, you can track mood, other things you want to include in there. And then you can also print out a report or export a report if you want to share that with your physician or other healthcare provider. We've recently made changes so that we can actually use this seizure diary for research purposes as well. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is spread the idea that by tracking your child's seizures, number one, you might be able to see patterns that are not so obvious, when it's happening day to day, but also that if you're using this as your tool to kind of track seizures for clinical care, it's also already a tool that can be used in research studies, if you're interested in participating in research studies.
So how different is this from seizure tracker?
Yeah, so I should say that there's...
I asked how different this is from seizure tracker, which is
right.
another prominent digital app.
Right. So yeah, absolutely. This is not the only option out there. Seizure tracker is another great app for tracking seizures. I think the main differences that I've seen, and I've not used seizure tracker as much, obviously, as this one, but I think the main difference is that for our research purposes, you want to be able to go back and say, if there's no seizure entered the day before, for example, you want to make sure that the reason there's no seizure entered for the day before is because there was no seizure and not just somebody didn't enter it or forgot. So for research purposes, I think that's one of the main differences, is that we have a sort of a validation step that says you entered no seizures yesterday. Is that correct? So, but otherwise, in terms of tracking your seizures for management purposes, I think they're very similar. Yeah. And there are many other diaries in addition to these two. So I'm offering this one as one that the foundation supports and updates. There's many others out there, and I think the bottom line is tracking usually helps. It's hard to do. It's, any of us who have tried to do tracking of any type, it's hard to be consistent and religious with that, but I think you can get benefits from doing it as much as you're able.
Jump in, Brandy. I'll
Sure.
say that I don't know anything about that app, but as a scientist, I very much agree that those data, and Marco touched on this too, right? One of the outstanding products of Ring14 is this biobank and availability of resources to the scientific community. This would certainly seem to fall out of that too.
That's what we're hoping, right? That the more standardized you can be in tools like that, the easier it is to compare data across people. And I think that's what we need. Yeah.
You use that app because the Epilepsy Foundation will collect the data, is that right?
Yes, so we don't collect personally identifiable health information, or PHI. You enter with a username and an email, and that's basically the only link to your identity. And we only use that information for, aggregate data kinds of purposes. You have the option, if you want to print your results in a report or export it into a file, you can take that information and do with it whatever you'd like. Right, but we don't include any identifying information at all. We also, more recently, have tried to launch something called the Clinical Trials Portal. And this is, we hope, going to be a one-stop shop for people with epilepsy to find more information about clinical trials in epilepsy. So we also push out information about a particular study in your disease area through the Rare Epilepsy Network, and I'll talk more about that. But this is another place where we're trying to build educational resources so that people who don't really know much about research could come learn about the different kinds of studies that are going on, what it means to be in a research study, what's an observational versus an interventional kind of research study, and what are the questions that you should ask before you consider joining one of them. So we are convinced that this is an important thing to do because, and I've been part of this, there are a number of studies in epilepsy that have had to be stopped early because they couldn't meet their enrollment targets. And so to me, that's a travesty, right? You've gotten a study that somebody's willing to fund. You've gotten a study that peer review committees think is really worth doing, that human subjects committees think is safe and important to do. and the study fails because we can't get enough people to enroll in it. And so this is one of my goals, is to try to reach a much broader community of people who are willing to be part of research so that we can learn more for the future. And then last, we offer something called the pipeline tracker. And this is a graphic right now. We're trying to make some improvements in the next year or so. But it's a way to look at what kinds of therapies are already available on the market and what's coming up through the pipeline. So what kinds of things are in phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 development before they go to the FDA for approval. So if you're interested in new therapies, this is a nice kind of compilation of everything that's out there currently. And we get information on new things coming into the pipeline because we offer a conference every other year we call the Pipeline Conference. And we invite companies to come and share updates on the new things that they're developing. And so that's one source of information for us about how to know what's coming through the pipeline. Okay, and then the last resource that I wanted to mention is called the Epilepsy Action Network. This is an advocacy network, so for making changes to legislation, either at the state level or the federal level. And it's a network that is designed so that organizations like Ring14 could plug into this and get access to an advocacy platform and some grassroots tools without having to build it yourselves. In many of the issues that affect people with epilepsy are the same issue, right? Access to care, funding for Medicaid, Americans with disabilities, protections, things like that. And so this is a way for groups that share those priorities to come together and advocate together, because as we know, numbers make a big difference. So this is another resource that I can offer. So there's lots more that the foundation does that I didn't put into the presentation, but this is kind of a flavor of the types of things that we offer. And I would really encourage you, if you take a look at any of these things and find them lacking for your situation, I'd love to hear that kind of feedback. Because the only way we're going to make these things more useful to more people in our community is if we hear, here's what I need and I'm not finding it. Or here's why this description of this tool doesn't reflect my situation. And I would really encourage you to please give me that kind of feedback. So I'll stop there because this was sort of my first chunk, and ask if there's questions or discussion that you want to have on any of those things.
I just missed how you got funded.
How we got funded?
Yeah.
So we offer our funding to researchers because we fundraise from other stakeholders, right? So we have donors, we have corporate sponsors, and in some cases we apply for grants from other organizations. So like the Rare Epilepsy Network, we are funded by PCORI, another institution. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How much is your budget? Can I ask that?
Yeah, and it ranges. So probably between 2 and 3 million are direct research expenditures of different kinds. We do the same thing. We offer some conference funding. We sponsored a conference on cannabinoid biology in epilepsy. We fund those grants that I talked about, but then we also do research. So we're doing the Rare Epilepsy Network. We're doing another project called the Human Epilepsy Project, which is looking for biomarkers in people with resistant focal seizures. So it varies with those different projects. And we're hoping to grow that because really the opportunity is tremendous, much more than $2 or $3 million can support.
So I have one more question about the Epidiolex.
Mm-hmm.
So now that, like in the state of Texas, they actually have cannabis. It's legal now for use, and of course they're going to have a strain for epilepsy that's high in CBD and low than the others. So my question is, do you have any feel for how the synthetic version is going to compare with the more natural drug that you can get from the cannabinoid plant. So
that's a great question, and that question is being asked like all across the country. So my first answer is the compounds that we're talking about, the CBD, the THC, they're all compounds. And so whether they're produced chemically or they're produced by a plant and extracted, in theory, their chemical structure is the same. And so, in that respect, I don't see that there should be much of a difference between a synthetic version and a plant extract. That being said, with a plant extract, there are many other kinds of compounds in that, even when they purify it to the degree that Epidiolex is, which is very, very, very pure. I've also heard people make an argument that they feel as though the combination of THC and CBD together has a different effect than CBD alone. And I think what I would say to that is the clinical trials that we have are on the plant-derived Epidiolex, the controlled phase 3 clinical trials that are available, which is the most rigorous way to test whether a product has an effect or not. As far as I know, we don't have that level of scientific evidence for some of these other combination studies. So that's not to say that they don't work. They may. But what we have available to us in the scientific and medical evidence is this particular combination of CBD with very, very, very trace amounts of other kinds of cannabinoids. So, I think the answer is it's still a question because we don't have the same level of evidence.
If you were going to advise somebody who had access to both, okay, would you have a recommendation on which one to try first? And if this fails, would you say go ahead and try the other one?
So first off, since I'm not a physician, I don't make medical recommendations, period. But I think what I would want someone to think about is the level of quality control and purity that is available for both of those kinds of formulations. So in one hand, you've got a product that is regulated and controlled by the same system that we use for any other drug. And in other scenarios, you have, in some cases very good and in some cases non-existent quality control. And so for me, that would be what I would encourage people to think about. And definitely to talk with your doctor about, because knowing what substances are in any of those things makes a big difference in how you manage all the other medications that somebody might be taking. And we know that CBD and other cannabinoids interact with other medications. And so it's really important that you're working with someone who understands those interactions if this is a route you're gonna go down.
I just have one quick comment and a question for you. My comment is, it occurs to me that Issa mentioned a couple of times that I'm a geneticist and I'm on the scientific advisory board. That's true, but I just wanted, my disclaimer is that I sort of work in genetic biology. I'm not a human geneticist. I don't work on humans at all, and it's really kind of a whole different world. So I know a lot about the techniques. I have appreciation for the science, but I'm not a human geneticist, so that's my disclaimer. My question is, in that line, can you say anything about clinical trials, just in general? Because I suspect I'm not the only one in the audience that's a little, just what is a clinical trial and how the patient advocate get involved in one, who they want to get involved in one. So that's a big question, if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a clinical trial is a controlled test in human subjects of a potential new product. And the gold standard for evaluating whether a new product is safe and effective is the randomized controlled clinical trial. So I'll take those in pieces. So randomized means that people who are entering the clinical trial are assigned to one of the groups in the trial in a random fashion. So usually in a clinical trial, you have the new product being tested, the new agent, and you have what's called a control group. So a group of patients or participants who receive either the standard regular care that they would otherwise receive without being exposed to the new agent. And those are the two groups that you want to compare, right? If you give this new agent and everything else is the same between these two groups, does this group of people have a better outcome than this group of people? And the reason for randomly assigning people to those groups is because there are lots and lots of factors that we don't always appreciate that might influence somebody's outcome. Right? So one example of that is could be the use of multivitamins, right? Lots of people take multivitamins. It turns out that people who take multivitamins are more health conscious. So they're more aware, are they getting a good exercise? Are they eating a good diet? And they take multivitamins. So that's the kind of thing that you want to make sure is evenly distributed between the two groups that you're comparing. And that's why you randomly assign people. The idea is that then theoretically you have just as many people taking multivitamins in this group, in the control group, as you have in the group that you're going to expose to the new intervention. And that helps to control for effects of things that we don't even think about ahead of time. So that's what randomization means. Sometimes it's described as a coin toss, that there's an equal chance that you could be in either group. The other is the controlled piece, and that's what I was just talking about, that there's a group that gets all the regular care that they would otherwise get, but not exposed to the new thing. That's called a control. And so you're doing that because you don't want to just give the new agent to a group of people and say, oh, any effect that we saw must be because we gave them this new agent. You actually want to do, at the same time, a control group so that you see any changes that happened only in the new exposed group and not in the control group. And so that the last piece is usually called double-blinded or double-masked trial. And what that means is when you're in the study, you as the person taking either the new agent or the placebo don't know whether you're getting the agent or the control, right? So that things that you might do to influence the outcome are also minimized. And the researcher or the clinician investigator who's giving that treatment to you also doesn't know which one, so that minimizes anything they might do to bias the outcome one way or the other. So that's kind of the gold standard way to test a potential new therapy against the current practice.
How and why would you enroll in a clinical trial?
So you would enroll in a clinical trial, number one, if you're interested in helping to advance a new therapy. Many cases, people who are looking for clinical trials are people for whom the standard therapies are not working, right? And so in epilepsy, that's led to something called the add-on trial. So many times people will be on 2 or 3 anti-seizure drugs and they're still not controlling their seizures. They might be interested in enrolling in an add-on clinical trial of a new therapy. They keep on the same things that they're taking, but they add on this new investigational agent, and potentially that may work. Now, on the other hand, if it's a truly randomized, controlled, double-blind trial, there's also the equal chance that they could be in the placebo group, the add-on placebo. So they keep on taking their regular medicines, they add on a placebo, and they may or may not see a change in their seizure frequency. So those are some of the reasons that people want to participate. Ideally, it's because you're not necessarily expecting any direct benefit for yourself, and you want to contribute to, advancing knowledge so that we can get better treatments for people. Yeah, that's some of the stuff that we're trying to put up on that clinical trials portal, so that you can go and learn more about the different types of studies. What I was just talking about is called an interventional study. So you give a new agent, but there's also observational studies. And that's where you don't make any changes in the person's regular care. You simply observe and record what happens over time with that person. And so in some ways, that's a less risky kind of study, because you're getting the same care that you would be getting anyway, but you're actually contributing to knowledge that can help the next person, or can help you. So I mean, the interesting thing about clinical trials is that some people go into a trial expecting that they might get benefit from the new agent. That might be one possibility. On the other hand, the reason we're testing new agents is because we don't know if they work or not, and we don't know how safe they are. And so there's also that level of risk that people need to take into account when you're thinking about enrolling in a study. So there's lots to think about. Yeah.
Somebody participates in a clinical trial, say for like a medication, and the medication works really well for them. When the clinical trial is over, do they continue to have access to that medication, or are they then have to stop taking it until it's approved by the FDA or whatever?
Yeah, so that's a big issue, and it can vary company by company. But in most cases, most companies are interested, if people are responding well, they want to keep folks, on that therapy. And so they will have, they are sometimes called long-term open studies, where once you finish the randomized, blinded part of the trial, if you want to stay on the treatment that you were on, you go into this open label phase where you can continue to receive it, but they're not collecting data in the same way over that time. And many companies do try to do that. On the one hand, it's good for participants who got benefit from that, because then they can stay on it. It's good for the company because then they can get longer-term safety exposure information. So often FDA will allow that kind of study to continue. But it's not always the case. So that's a good question to ask, before you would enroll in a trial. Is there an opportunity to continue taking this if I want after the trial itself ends? That's a great question to ask.
So these are your first compound you support in a clinical trial?
The ones that I mentioned? Oh, actually, no. That's a very small snapshot of the things that we fund. We funded a number of devices that have moved pretty far along. More recently, we learned that FDA approved it's called a dry headset. So for EEG, instead of getting the sticky goo and stuff in your, this is a headset. It looks a lot like a bicycle helmet that can sit on the head, just kind of fits nicely, and then you can wear that over a longer period of time. It's called, the company is Zedo, and it's IZEG, something like that. But they, we were a company that we funded from a very early stage of development, and now they've made it across that FDA finish line. So we've got a number of examples like that.
Is it wireless?
It is wireless, yes.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, yeah. EEG is one of the places where I think we're going to see an explosion of new kinds of technologies really soon. Yep.
But for pharmacological compound, is the only one?
No, in fact, if you're interested, I can send you a list of all the different agents that we've funded.
In different steps in different clinical trial steps.
Yes. Yeah, that's what that pipeline tracker thing is actually supposed to share. Yep. Okay, so how are we doing on time?
We're good.
Okay.
30 more minutes.
Okay, all right. Then I'll switch gears and tell you more about the Rare Epilepsy Network. which is a team effort. So I work together with Dale Hesdorfer, who's an epidemiologist at Columbia University, and Barbara Kroner, who's an epidemiologist at RTI International. She's also the mom of Ellie, who is a girl with Aicardi syndrome. So she's got one of the rare epilepsies that we study in this syndrome. And then Kathleen Farrell works with me at the foundation, trained as a physician in Ireland, came back to the US and decided that she wanted to work in patient advocacy instead of in the hospital, and we are so grateful because she's our project director and she's fabulous. So this is the team that right now leads the Rare Epilepsy Network. And our mission is to address urgent health challenges of the rare epilepsy community by doing a couple different things: engaging parents and caregiver and patients, making that data then available to researchers, and investigating the causes and consequences of rare epilepsies in order to improve diagnosis, treatment, and find cures. So we also have a broad mission with the Rare Epilepsy Network. We have a large number of groups who participate with us, which is terrific. They're represented here, and Ring14 you see is one of our groups. Isa has been a fabulous contributor, and I have to say I'm so grateful that you all are sharing her with us because she has a lot of really good things to contribute. But the reason all of these groups are coming together is some of what Isa talked about earlier, is that individually, when you're small, it can sometimes be hard to attract researchers, to attract funding, to attract interest in helping your disorder move towards therapies. And so the idea is that by coming together, these rare epilepsies can sort of benefit from learning together, finding places where there's a lot of overlap, and also finding places where there's uniqueness. In many cases, there is a constellation of the same kinds of issues across rare epilepsies. So it's the intractable or medication-resistant seizures, it's intellectual delay, developmental delay, can be behavioral challenges. Autism is very prevalent across rare epilepsies. And so by coming together, are there things that we can learn about those things that would benefit everybody? We currently have over 1,400 people who have enrolled in the Rare Epilepsy Network, and what that means is they have completed our survey of information about their situation. So we ask a long list of questions. I'm not going to pretend that it's not an investment of your time to be able to answer that survey, but with that data then we can create insights across the different rare epilepsies. So I put this slide in here not because there's a roadmap to getting precision medicines or medicines that are targeted perfectly for an individual's situation, but there are, I would say, guideposts. There are milestones that need to happen in order to get from a scientific understanding of a disorder all the way to a therapy that actually impacts the outcome. And I want to compliment you all. You guys are doing a fantastic job because all the things that Marco talked about are here on this sort of roadmap. So the Rare Epilepsy Network, I would say, is part of this insight piece of the puzzle. Build an understanding of the complexity of the disorder, the spectrum of phenotypes in the disorder, really characterize what does it mean to have Ring14 syndrome and all of the other rare epilepsies that we talk about in the REN. That helps you to assess potential biologic mechanisms that could be responsible for the symptoms that you see. And knowing what the biology is behind that syndrome then helps you define this could be a therapeutic target. Something totally different could be a therapeutic target. But you have to have that foundation of insight from the clinical situation. And then from there, you build a strategy to capitalize on this potential therapeutic avenue. And so you all are doing that with the grants you're funding, the registries you're funding, the samples and biospecimens that you're collecting. All of that is helping to build the foundation to get to a therapeutic push. So the Rare Epilepsy Network has a website think it's ren.rti.org. And this is where you can go to learn more about what we're doing or to enroll in the survey if you're interested. Right now we have 1,428 people enrolled, and it's across more than 40 different epilepsy syndromes. So I listed here those that we track by name. You can see that Ring14 has about 5 participants so far, which is fantastic. The largest number of people enrolled are coming from tuberous sclerosis, so about 257, and followed by Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, 205. Tuberous sclerosis is a single gene mutation disorder, but it leads to a syndrome of different impact. Whereas Lennox-Gastaut syndrome is really a clinical diagnosis for a lot of different rare epilepsy diagnoses. So for example, you can have a tuberous sclerosis syndrome mutation, and your clinical picture is that of Lennox-Gastaut. So there's some overlap there, although we've categorized somebody in one or the other. But it just goes to show you that there is a broad range of different kinds of epilepsy syndromes, and we're trying to collect and parse out each of them. The other thing I'll say is that when we do our data analysis, we analyze syndromes that have 10 or more participants. It's not to say we don't look at the data for syndromes that have smaller numbers, but when we talk and give presentations and publications, we use those that have 10 or more, and it's for a couple different reasons. One is that under 10, you start to worry about revealing someone's identity. Right? So we have fewer and fewer people, it becomes easier and easier to figure out who that person is. So we feel like 10 is a reasonable threshold for trying to protect somebody's identity. The other is that you want to be sure that you have a large enough number to try to share the full picture of the population. So with fewer people, you might worry that the people that you have are somehow very different from the rest of the folks who haven't enrolled. So all that's to say, if you would like to be part of this registry, we would very much like for you to be a part, because we'd like to get to at least that 10. And this is the kind of data that we collect. One of the things that's unique about the Rare Epilepsy Network is that the information is coming entirely from caregivers right now. So we don't go to physicians or clinics and grab medical records there. We actually rely on caregivers to input this information. And that allows us to ask some questions about how the experience of having a rare epilepsy in your family impacts you. So we ask questions about both the child's demographics and the family demographics. We ask about quality of life for the affected person and quality of life for the family, the caregiver. And I think that makes us unique. We have a lot to offer there. So we'll ask about seizure characteristics and the history of the diagnosis, developmental milestones for the affected person, other phenotypic characteristics and comorbidities. So is autism present? Are there sleep disorders? Are there gastrointestinal issues? Those kinds of questions are in that comorbidities section. We ask what kind of treatments the child has been on. We ask about genetic testing, and we offer the option to upload EEG or imaging reports. We don't get very many of these. I think, number one, because many families don't have them. And so we haven't thus far done too much with the EEG or the MRI. So on the website, we do return results to the community about the information we collect. So this is in our dashboard section. And if you're interested to go and look, obviously nobody's identifiers are here. This is all aggregated, de-identified data. But you can go in and see, for a certain syndrome, what's the distribution of male and female, what's the number of treatments that people have tried, the types of treatments people have tried, all of those kinds of things. You can really dig around and answer some of your own questions on these dashboards. We have search fields that you can filter by different things.
So do you have to have the 10 people in order to be on the dashboard?
So on the dashboard, I think, that's a good question. I haven't looked specifically.
I haven't looked at the dashboard lately, so I was just curious if you could find Ring14 or if you had to be at the 10 in order to contribute to the dashboard. I mean, I know you contribute
You contribute overall, yeah, but let me check to see if we drill down to that on the dashboard level. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so next I was just going to give you an example of some of the sort of aggregate questions that we've asked across different syndromes, and I'm using tuberous sclerosis as an example, but you know, we could conceivably do this same thing for Ring14. So we looked at the distribution of people who are in our database. It's about half and half, and you can see that 217 of the individuals we have information about are coming because the caregiver is providing that information. 37 in this population are self-report. So these are adults, 18 or older, who have tuberous sclerosis and are giving information for themselves. In many of our syndromes, it's entirely caregiver-entered information. A pretty broad range of age distribution in TS. Looks very different in some of our other syndromes. And in this population, we've got people responding from pretty much all over the world. This is obviously an international registry, although most of our respondents come from the US.
So you are collecting data even outside the US?
Yes, we're open to collecting data from outside. So when we look at things like medical history, the majority of respondents with TS have had over 100 seizures in the last 6 months. We look at developmental milestones. 2% have not sat up without help. 3% have not walked. But 25% have never spoken a 2-word sentence. So being able to look at these sort of across rare epilepsies has been quite interesting. And in TS, the co-occurring conditions that seem to be most prevalent are autism, anxiety disorder, some ADD or ADHD, and depression. Again, that autism, that anxiety, that we see that through many of the rare syndromes. And a pretty broad range of seizure frequencies. So this is no seizures in the last 6 months, about 22%, and then all the way through, seizures, multiple seizures every day. We look at medication history. On average, people have tried 6 to 7 different anti-seizure medications and are currently on 2 to 3. The top AEDs that people are using in our registry for TS are lamotrigine, levetiracetam, oxcarbazepine, valproic acid, and vigabatrin. But we also look at the top 5 discontinued AEDs, and you see some of the same players there, but this can be helpful as well. We were talking at lunch about one group of disorders, so SCN8A families, got together, shared their information, and what they learned just from, families talking to each other is that almost every one of their kids had worsening with one of the drugs. And so finding that one of those drugs seems systematically to not be a good drug for that population is really valuable information to be able to pull together. And it's hard to do unless you have a system, like this to find that. So to me, that's one of the things that we can see as a value of participating in a registry like this. We looked at genetic testing. Again, it's pretty variable across the different syndromes, but we'd like to see that becomes more and more common over time, that kids who have seizures early on, have any kind of delay, are very quickly getting access to genetic testing so that they can, if there is a treatment that is appropriate for them, that we identify it as soon as possible. So for the Rare Epilepsy Network, we have been funded by PCORI over the last several years, and our funding cycle with PCORI is coming to an end next year. And so we're in the process of really looking for other sources of funding and new directions that will help us achieve some of our other goals to start accelerating the idea of of standardizing, getting people diagnosed more quickly, getting people to the support that they might want to access more quickly, and to really trying to promote these interventional trials. So one of the ways that we're looking to do that is in this learning health system approach. But overall, I think and Issa, you should speak to this too, but I think one of the unexpected benefits of the Rare Epilepsy Network has been to build relationships across the rare epilepsy organizations, and to allow people to kind of learn from each other, to share the experience that they've had, and so that all of the organizations can learn and thrive together. So I invite you to speak to whether you've found that.
This is really one of the big reasons I asked Brandy to come and speak, because I think that this registry can be potentially so empowering for ours, because they're doing all this analysis without any money from us individually, okay? So Brandy is right, it is a consuming survey, okay?
Yeah.
It'll take you a couple of hours to do it. It is broken up. You do it over the internet. It has segments. You can walk away from it. You can come back to it. You'll want to have your diaries handy, because it's going to ask you about drug history. So for younger parents, it's going to be easier. For older parents, you're going to have to scratch your head a little bit and say, I'm going to go back. But the end point is, once we reach this 10 person, they'll give us a report. And they'll update it for us as it changes. So you get this general idea of certain things about our syndrome that anecdotally we have, but now it's a little bit more concrete and everything. And so one of the major things that we've learned out of REN is that all kids with early epilepsy, early onset epilepsy, they have so much in common. And so we don't know if it's the epilepsy or the drugs or some combination, but our kids have all these incredible comorbidities. So we share common problems. So we can learn something from these other syndromes and from their different therapies and things like that. And so they published a paper about pneumonia and how prevalent that is. And so all these rare syndromes contributed to that. And one of the things that's not on here, but we've talked about in our meetings, is having a conference together. And it makes a lot of sense, because these conferences, they take a lot of money. It's great to get as many people involved as possible. So if that comes to fruition, you can see about a big conference where you get to invite a lot of different speakers, and you get to choose which talks you want to go to, but then the individual rare syndromes have a breakout session. So you get the full community, but you also get your individualized thing. And together we have a certain synergy. Keeps all the costs down, and you get a larger sense of community. So I don't know if that'll happen, but I'm for it, because I think it makes a lot of sense to go in that direction. So please take a look at this. Please try to help us get up to the 10. If you take the survey, please post on Facebook. Oh, I completed my REN survey, and encourage other members, because we have plenty of people in our community. We should be able to hit this goal pretty easily, but I need your help, okay?
So the curator is the caregiver. Is the caregiver that contributes to provide data?
Yes, yes.
And the curator keep the data, and there is a follow-up. So from your data, you see that the curator enters more time to keep.
Yeah, our original goal was to make it a longitudinal survey. What we found is that I think after people realized how much time was involved in the baseline, they were not coming back for that longitudinal piece. So we're rethinking how we're going to do the longitudinal, and I think what we'll do in the future, we've got plans to do this, we're going to streamline those modules, and rather than asking you to sit down and spend 2 or 3 or more hours, we're going to just push out much smaller surveys that you might be able to even answer on your phone, and that will help us with that retention over time, because we recognize you guys are stretched in so many different ways. To ask you to sit and put that kind of time into a survey is a big ask. So we want to change it to make it a little more user friendly.
I can strongly support this input to collaborate in this project. I know that I agree with you. Companies ask for mandatory to have very well phenotyped data before to start a clinical trial. And just a couple of suggestions. Maybe you remember my slides on RD Connector.
Yes.
Okay.
And I
want
to.
The objective, the goal is to release the GUID, the globally unique identifier. Each patient should have a unique number. You can put this tool inside, and with this number, it's much more easy to understand all different information from every patient. Data here, the biological samples in another place,
yes.
The genetic data in a third other place. So with this number, it's much more easy to coordinate all different research and other activities going on for every disorder.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about that.
And I just mentioned during my presentation, in Europe, we have a new regulation for privacy.
Yes.
So if you are collecting data from Europe, you have to look at the GDPR. It's much more stringent policy for clinical and personal data located outside Europe.
Yes,
So
yeah, you're right. We've, for the seizure diary, the My Epilepsy Seizure Diary, we are GPRU compliant, and we're also looking at that for the REN. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, you had a question.
Well, it wasn't a question really, but my oldest son has arthritis, and when he was diagnosed, the Arthritis Foundation sent us a box, and it had a small book that was published, I guess, by the Arthritis Foundation. It talked about all the different types of arthritis and treatment plans and what your child should look like with, like what his life will look like with arthritis. And then I also sent, please go to this page and put in your information so that we can get a database of information through you. And it was really easy because they sent it to me, I had it, they also had provided an envelope if you wanted to just send it if you didn't have access to a computer. And it was really easy to, I've got 5 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or however long it took. It didn't take long. But I also got that information. Like when we were diagnosed with epilepsy, before we were diagnosed with Ring14 syndrome, I think we got one little thing in the hospital. Said, you should check out epilepsy.org or whatever it was. But no real, they need information from you. They need all of these things. So I don't know if you guys are equipped to do that for especially children who get diagnosed with epilepsy. But that was really helpful and really easy to collect information for the Arthritis Foundation. They have like a whole, I don't know, I guess they were just so organized, but anyway, I just didn't know if you guys had anything like that.
No, I really appreciate
it's
hearing that.
Super easy because
and that's where we have to get.
It was so cool. I'm like, oh wow, this is what arthritis is, because it's really hard sometimes to remember everything when you first diagnosed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really appreciate hearing that experience, and I agree. That's where we have to go. One of the problems.
You guys are such a big organization. You might be able to fund that. I don't know. I mean, the Arthritis Foundation is obviously huge, and they do the arthritis walk every year, and they raise money that way, and we participate in it pretty much every year and stuff like that. But it was really helpful to get
that's
a
great.
box with information. Give us your data, and it was really simple.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One of our struggles is that the epilepsy organizations and the foundation, as one of the, we're not as well integrated with the providers, right? So when somebody gets a diagnosis of epilepsy, it's not like they automatically say, oh, and here's your organization, right? But they should. And so that's one of the things we're trying to work on in this learning healthcare system, is that when a person makes a new diagnosis, that part of what they do is connect that family to the right organization. Because I completely agree with you. That's a critical time in this journey where you need to find your community, right? And so, yeah, no, I really agree. And I'd love to hear more about the experience.
And Epilepsy Foundation does do, if you go to their center and you tell them, in addition, I have Ring14, they do have our information so that
Right.
there is
In our
this
helpline.
funneling. So you start at Epilepsy Foundation, and that's one path where you can find Ring14. But it's kind of funny because of the age of the internet and everything. Once you get a specific diagnosis, sometimes you forget about this high level, like Epilepsy Foundation, that can also be helpful. So you go immediately to the finest granule of information. So you come immediately to us, whereas Ring14 USA, unfortunately, we don't have the funding yet to provide all these services. One of the reasons I brought Brandy in is to kind of go out and say, but look at this larger level. You've got this level of support also. But you're right, we don't have, we're not as connected with the physicians, you know, and that's
Yet.
And the hospitals, though.
Yet.
The hospitals should definitely be better at that. I think,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
connecting you with
Yeah,
the foundation.
really
Because I don't think our hospital.
It was like, go pick up your prescription, your son got off the soap, you have a good day.
It wasn't
We're
like, there's
are
a
you
whole
serious?
foundation
What's
that can
happening
help
now?
you with this. I think they should get better at that. I mean, that's not just you guys in particular, but like the hospitals. Like, hey, there's this wonderful foundation that can give you so much information.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And part of what you can do to advocate for that is to give that message back to your health system, right? Like, the more they hear from patients and families what needs they have that aren't being met, the more willing they are to work with groups like ours to make sure that that happens. So you guys can be a powerful lever for that to change too. Yeah. All right.
Well, we are at 2:30.
Okay, so I think
we're
I'll
not gonna
stop
be able
there.
to do the last portion, which is this learning health system. But I will, Learning Health Network, I was in a meeting for this.